Oh, right.
Are you good with the microphone?
Yeah, I think I will try to, well, be as loud as possible and maybe, well, that way and that way. So basically, welcome back from lunch. This is the topic of our talk, so we're going to discuss spatiotemporal representation and space, especially in, well, Final Fantasy, referring particular to Final Fantasy VII, as you may have recognized from the picture, if you, well, ever had played that sort of game. I'm speaking in the Wii mode, not because of a double personality disorder, or at least not this time, because this paper is co-authored with Tagliabue, that you can see here, and is sorely missed as Iris during the game of Final Fantasy, who couldn't have attended the conference. And that's a big problem for you, especially, because the paper is co-author, and he was responsible, especially with the formal latter part, the part on space. So this will cause me to have the discussion of space being more informal and less technical. Given these, well, entry remarks, this is the plan. I will first introduce the topic of the talk and why video games are relevant to being in time in the Final Fantasy mode. In the first part, I will discuss and compare truth in fiction and truth in video games. And in the second part, I will, that is the third actually, on the plan, I will move to basically developing some sort of mirror topology of video games. The core idea of the paper is to use video games as case studies to approach from, say, a different point of view, stuffs that were hotly debated in, say, standard philosophy. So, that's it. In the first part, we will have an analysis of game from the outside, making sense of what happens there and of the way we talk about games and things being true in video games and in, say, the fictional space of video games. So basically, it's philosophy of language 101 applied to video games. Then we will move to games from the inside, and we will try to see how space is structured into video games using the wonderful tools of mereology and some formal tools. Well, using those formal tools in an informal way, because Jacopo is not here, as I told you already. So, well, so the story of truth in fiction goes, basically we want to deal with sentences and the truth values of these sentences that are used to express something that is true in a fiction, as the fact that Holmes lives in Baker Street, something that is true implied by a fiction, that is to say, we have the fiction, we have reality, what we know about reality, and so we can say that Holmes lives nearer to Paddington than to Waterloo. And then we have general truth about fiction, that is to say, Holmes is a fictional character or Holmes is a detective. The standard way of philosophy of language, or at least what Lewis in Truth in Fiction thought the standard way was, is to, well, make sense of these sentences, prefixing them with an operator that says that in fiction, P is true only if P would be true if the fiction was told as known fact rather than fiction. That was the first idea. And so we have Lewis in the fiction, Holmes lives in 211B of Baker Street, and the truth condition of this are that 1 star is true if Holmes lives at 211B of Baker Street, would be true if the fiction was told as a known fact. If we buy the Lewisian story about, well, how this sort of intentional operator work, we can nicely apply some sort of counterfactual analysis of this and unpack this with possible words. And this leads to the 1 star down there that is true if in the closest word, W, where the story of Holmes is told as a fact, Holmes, in fact, in W lives at 201B of Baker Street. Well, so far so good. This is the story we already know, more or less. What happens with video games? We may try to readapt this sort of analysis, replacing the intentional modal operator in a fiction with in the video game. And this leads to, in the video game, P is true only if P would be true if the video game's events were real rather than simulated. So consider, well, our starting imaging, that is, Sephiroth kills Iris. And this sentence would be true according to our analysis in the closest word W, where Final Fantasy VII is reality, which is quite a nice game, quite a nice word, sorry, actually, and not a simulation. And Sephiroth in that word W is going to kill Iris. And given the world, the narrative universe of Final Fantasy VII, that unfortunately for, well, every normal player of Final Fantasy VII is certainly the case. But here, these analogies start to appear because video games and books works in quite different ways concerning contingency and necessity in truth in video games. That is to say, given the richer structure of ontological structure of video games that we will try to unpack later on in the last part of the talk, there is a way to distinguish what is contingent and what is necessary in the run of a video game that is different from contingency and necessity in the book, or in, well, fiction intending as book. And that is to say, whenever we are going to play Final Fantasy, Iris is necessarily going to die, unfortunately. But other things, such as the number of fightings you're going to do, or the number of chocobos being there, that's something contingent that varies from a single Final Fantasy run to another Final Fantasy run. And that is not something that you have clearly stated, as in video games, in fiction. In fiction, you are dealing with gappy sentences. What is contingent is in general something that is not specified. But whenever we are going to read the book, you will read the same words, word by word. So that's the first difference that we are going to unpack in a while. A more general comparison between truth in video games and truth in fictions runs if we take a look at this sort of problematic cases that were there for truth in fiction. And we claim that the same kinds of problem holds also for truth in video games. That is to say, when you compare different universes, that is to say, fictional universes, might be different fictional words of book, or different fictional, different video games. So if we say that there are more planets in Star Wars video game than in Star Trek, concerning video games, or that Harry Potter is more like the perfect husband that Edward Cullen, we had some sort of terrible reading, sorry. That's the same problem that you have in fiction are the same in video games. And the same goes for gappy sentences I already mentioned. So if we take some sort of different range of kind of fiction and we move to, well, films, and you say that Shinji was secretly in love with Asuka or Rei, it depends on which stance do you take on the Evangelion universe. That is problematic for the Lewisian analysis we are remodeling in the same ways as is the Final Fantasy example of Claude Strife being secretly in love with Red 13. And then there is also one of the most interesting kinds of problem if you are going to work on how we interact with video games. That is to say, the way in which fictional words and, well, the real world we live in interacts. So if you are reading David Foster Wallace, another sorely missed guy, book Infinite Jest, you may say that, well, Arthur the Darkness Dies won less tennis matches than Michael Stich. Or in a game, you may use and reapproach these examples, saying that it's harder being a major in SimCity than in the real city, or the other way around, of course. Well, so far so good. This is just a 101 application, and same problem you had there are the problem you had in fiction, are the problem you will have in video games. But then we claim that while trying to do this sort of research and approach video games as a standard case test intuition for that sort of analysis, we came across that couple of examples. That is to say, well, Claude died because I pushed the wrong button, or Super Mario died because I pushed the wrong button, and Anna Karenina died because I turned the page. Well, 6 is terribly damn wrong compared to 5. And here there's some different way in which truth in fiction interacts with truth in video games, because our role as, well, the author of the gaming fiction and the book fiction is somehow different. Agency matters quite a lot more in video games than in reading activity, actually. And that leads us to the second, well, last part of the talk, third, or without introduction. That is to say, well, how can we try to explain or inquire deeper into the fact that Claude died because I pushed the wrong button seems to be true, and Anna Karenina died because I turned the pages seems to be maybe true, of course, but in a different way from the sentence concerning video games. The idea is to, well, as in the first part, we use the account of philosophy of language for truth in fictional discourse, and we tested it upon video games, stumbling upon this nice feature of agency in video games being different from agency in fiction. Here, we are going to do the same experiment, but this time, we'll experiment with video games and formal theories that are out there to track the relationships between parts and whole. That is to say, mereology, or mirror topology more in particular, when we are interested in relationships between parts and places and space. So we had these different extensional mereology theories on the market, and we are going to apply them to our beloved game of Super Mario I showed you before, and try to use this formal tool to try to reconstruct some sort of differences in the different kinds of space that are exhibited by different kinds of video games. So, well, let's go start quite easily. Imagine that Super Mario is not allowed to jump, so it's just a one-dimensional space. And we know that at any given time, Mario is just there in one space. And there are the different spaces we see there. And we can give some sort of sketchy definition of a path from a cell to another that is a sequence basically of what is in between the 2 points we are considering. And then we say that for every point in the space, there is something before and after. This is the first general characterization, quite nice and easy. But then we are missing some sort of crucial feature. Despite the problems of we being located somewhere and having a television there, I'll just focus on what's happening in the video game and ignore the fact that there is a player for now. So we had this problem of, well, for sure Mario is down there in a place of time. That is to say, is somewhere in the cell down here. And we need this constraint to express the fact that there is a location. So we say that a character is located in only one cell at each point in the time. So no player says electron having a dual nature or weird metaphysical claims here. And then, well, as you may have wondered from this set of cells is not indifferent the way in which you consider it. That is to say, Super Mario space is going from left to right. And there is a privileged direction in this space. So we can lay down an axiom and consider the fact that is it true that there is some sort of linear ordering over that sort of cells. And in fact, if you remember playing Super Mario, you are not allowed to turn back on the screen, because at least in the first Super Mario, you weren't allowed to go back, because the game it's all a matter of going from point A to the end B down there, from left to right on the screen. And well, it would be interesting if you take care about the way in which we interact between players and gaming spaces. That also in cultures that from right to left, Super Mario goes from left to right, but, well, that's up to you. We are here doing some sort of different kind of thing. So, the conclusion for the characterization of the space of Super Mario that is modeled as one space, and with this Markovian being there, that is now time for me to explain to you, is simply this, that Super Mario is a game with basically no memory. whatever you can do, whatever Mario can do, depends only from where he was, the time, the spatio-temporal moments before this. If he is in cell 2, he can go back to cell, he can move forward to cell 3, and so on. There's no memory, there's no status. For instance, in Final Fantasy VII or in role-playing games, the game has memory. If you were poisoned and you keep walking around being poisoned, well, that affects the game. If you fight 1,000 enemies, you are of level 10, say. If you had no fights, there's no experience. So this is the first characterization, and that's quite interesting because the more game develops, if we can say the controversial claim that Final Fantasy VII is more an advanced game than Super Mario, Final Fantasy VII is more evolved because it allows the player, that is Claude Strife and the gang of 3 you are trying to rescue Iris or defeat Sephiroth with, to have more possibilities. And you obtain more possibilities by way of imposing less constraints on space. Because in Final Fantasy, there is no linear ordering down there. You can go almost wherever you want. Right, that's the point I want to approach now. That is to say, let's add more dimension. No longer just a one-dimensional Markovian space, but let's move to Final Fantasy. So a game with memory and a three-dimensional space. In Final Fantasies and in general in role-playing game, you can go wherever you want with no linear ordering constraint on the way space is built. This is true in general. In the particular narration and narratives of the story, we have some sort of necessities, such as Iris' death, and the story might develop in some way that it makes it impossible for you to reach some sort of places you have been before. The example is from the beginning of the story. You start in a reactor, you blow up the reactor, and of course, you have blown up the reactor. And it's not the case that you can go back into the reactor because the reactor is no longer there. So from that point of view, the necessary fact that in order to go along the game, you have to blow the reactor makes it the case that after you blew it, you're not allowed to go back in that spatio-temporal portion. But this brings us closer to what probably is the true, a better frame for space in video games. And it's the case of adventure games such as Tomb Raider. Tomb Raider is a mixture between the easy forced linear order space of Super Mario going from left to right and the place of never-ending possibilities of Final Fantasy. Because it's true that in general you can make Lara Croft move wherever you want, but some sort of sequences of the game, that is to say the one in which you have to do some weird complicated stuff, throw a rope and so on, they are quite Markovian. They are some sort of necessitated path. That is to say, you can jump from B to C only if you manage to get the only one path that will bring you from A to B, and so on. So you can say that you have to do 7 jumps, and you're not allowed to do the 7th jump if you didn't have the previous 6 exactly one after another. And that's the same as Super Mario going that way, that way, that way, and so on. Well, you got it. And basically, that's it. Given that I still have 1 minute or similar, there's this bonus of driving simulations. Driving simulations seems to be prima facie as well. You can go wherever you want in the circuit. You can go the wrong way around. You can crash against walls, so you can explore the space wherever you want. But given the spatio-temporal characterization we had, there's this fact that driving simulation are a race, and in a race you go from left to right again, as in Super Mario. Basically, a Formula 1 simulation is just the level of Super Mario that is being turned around into a spiral, or a Möbius strip or something. And that's basically because if you have to run 3 laps of a race, the space is the same for every lap, but lap 2 is closer to the end rather than lap 1. And so in our going from this to this, at lap 2 you are here in between. And another quite interesting fact is that from this characterization, Doom and Tomb Raider more or less have the same intermediate feature, despite there being one first-person shooting game and an adventure. So, well, this is more or less the end of the talk, given that I'm running out of time. And our research showed that use video games as case studies to, well, bring some more fun into what you may consider as old, boring philosophical topics or standard philosophy topics, where it seems to be that there's not much more to be said unless you are going to delve deeply into huge technical literature, because we are dealing with philosophy of language and formal stuff of mereology. But we showed that this standard tool failed in video games because there are new problems to be tracked. Mereology is not going to address the problem of space in the way video games forced us to approach it, because mereology is more on the universe. It's not going to care about a single, well, differences between Mario and Tomb Raider and Gran Turismo. They are all the same for the mereologists, so to speak. But we think that this, this failure of standard philosophy on video games is quite interesting, and it can bring to some sort of new challenges for these disciplines. And given that both me and Jacopo start playing a lot of video games before, say, get stuck into the game of philosophy, that's a tremendous great news for us, and that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Guillermo. We can run, I think, 5 minutes over time. We started a little late with this session. So, questions? Michael Burke.
Right, Michael Burke from Vancouver. I was wondering, I think you were probably using quite casually, because you put it in commas, the expression standard philosophy.
Yeah.
I think, in the analytic tradition that this, after 110 years from Frege on,
Yeah.
It's a highly contested area, and the relationship between truth and semantics is, I don't know, highly dubious, I would say.
Yeah.
So given that, have you considered, since you appreciate that, have you considered that the kinds of problems that you found in the relationship between trying to give a truth semantic account of truth and meaning in video games, and that was some of the examples you were coming up with suggested that was a problematic area. Have you considered that it might also be a problematic area in fiction? And maybe you could work the other way, suggest that there is no easy basis for talking about counterfactual truth in fiction, that this is a kind of mistake. Did you go in that direction at all in your considerations?
Well, first of all, thank you. Yeah, we both grew up in analytic philosophy, more or less, and yeah, there's a standard analytic between standard and philosophy. Ongoing, let's say, on using video games to unravel and contest Lewisian application, that it's a direction we might consider, but given what emerged from the talk, say that this is part of a work in progress that relies on, well, side interests of both of us, despite Jacopo having obtained a PhD in digital philosophy. So the part of spatiotemporal things and cellular automata store from his work. We are interested the more in figuring out, try to lay down some sort of formal representation of agency from the point of view of the character of the game. That is to say, explain the difference between Claude died because I pushed the wrong button, rather than Anna Karenina died because I turned the wrong page. I turned the page of the book. And this is something that is not, maybe in deontic logic and agency they are doing some sort of thing, but there they have an intentional framework for ought and so on. Whereas mereology we are using is extensional. So there's this overlapping of intension and extension formal theories that is quite interesting. And possibly out of this still, ideal work actually, possible object in a Manongian sense if you want, we may find out reasons that may allow us from staying in, say, our standard analytic tradition to go against the counterfactual application of truth in fiction in that way. So basically, I think we have the chance to do what you're asking us to do and consider this option. But after this strange detour through agency, that is the things that is interesting us the most.
Thank you for the presentation. What's very interesting. Two questions. First one, what about games like Braid or Portal, which switch the normal spatial and temporal coordinates? But the second question is, if I correctly understood, you use the logic of Lewis, yes?
Yeah.
So, can the logic of Lewis can give answers not just about the single tokens in a single events or single objects in a game, or also can the logic of Lewis can give answers also to more general, maybe interesting things related to types, general types, schemes of interpretations about computer games in general. I'm talking about why to understand if a statement like Holmes lives in Baker Street, this is related to a token event or object or fact. Can the logic of Lewis can also give answers about facts which are collection of facts, which are sets, which are types, not single, maybe?
Yeah. Well, concerning video games, more advanced video games such as Portals, playing some sort of tricky conditions to times and space. Nonetheless, no matter how they turn the space upside down, that space should have some sort of axiom and should be somewhere there encoded in the game. So they are more interesting examples, but I think they are not killer counterexamples to our approach from the methodological point of view. Concerning the second part on Lewis directly, I think that this forces us with a detour on the ontology of fiction, because you are talking about types and token, fictional objects, and so on. And so the answer is something like, well, yes, but maybe there is a lot more of the story to be told. And Lewis, I think he says that some sort of problems that I outlined before that are common to truth in fiction and truth in video games can be handled in some sort of, at least prima facie, better from the point of view of a Manongian ontology of fictional characters. And there he is quoting Parsons. I had this idea of going through Berto and later's Manongian ontologies, but I think that probably what you're asking, if the question is, can you do a one-on-one comparison from what we did with in fiction and in video game and go from token to type, the short answer is no.
Okay, last question, and then brief answer, and then Jonna.
Okay, this Veli-Matti Karolti from University of Turku, Finland. This is perhaps comment as well as to the previous question, as well as to your presentation. When it comes to Lewis, he was quite well aware of these problems in fiction as well when it comes to his theory. And for this problem, he suggested as we know, the principle of minimal departure, right? So wouldn't that be some kind of a tool that would at least partly solve this problem with games as well? Like the principle that when in fiction there are problematic points that the reader cannot interpret, he must or she must interpret that point according to the most logical or the most possible thing. So when it comes to the Final Fantasy thing, maybe we could also say that what is true in Final Fantasy is the arc plot or the arc thing. Of course, you can depart from that, but that would probably be one answer.
Yeah, well, thanks for the suggestion. I think there's these sort of things going bad in fiction are inconsistencies. Whereas with video games, given we have a code, sometimes we have to distinguish two levels of inconsistencies. Say inconsistency being there in the plot, and that's the same as Lewis' story of holes being wounded somewhere in his arms and in his legs during the same arc, and you say, well, who cares? He has been wounded once, and we don't know whether it's there or here. But there are also inconsistencies in the code, and that we have to distinguish is this sort of bugs, because bugs are going somehow to arguably kill the video game if the code is not able to be run from the beginning to the end, or if there are serious bugs. Say that I think in Super Mario you can finish from World 1 to World 8 in Mario 3, and that was an Easter egg, or it was intended. But imagine a game that is supposed to be tremendously long, and unbeknownst to the programmer, there is a bug that allows you to finish it after 5 minutes. That's a different sort of inconsistency from the one you is talking about. So again, the answer is a partial yes, but video games has something more in it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. What am I supposed to do here?